welcome and good afternoon to this virtual IoT roundtable. My name is Martin Schneider and I'm from Skarmeta Focus, and we are contributing to the DOS event that is organizing this event. So that's actually the fourth virtual roundtable. Each year there's one event like this. And this day, or this time, we have the topic of IoT supply chain security challenges and impact. So I'm looking forward, since we have great speakers from relevant authorities and organizations across the world, for instance, ENISA, NIST, and Excel. And I think they have prepared very interesting material that you would love to hear, and it gives you some interesting insights. So as I said, this event is organized by the DOS project that is about design and operation of secure supply chains. So it's well suited to the topic of the today roundtable event. We have 8 presenters that will hold their presentations one after another. And in the end, we have a 30-minute panel discussion. With starting, and I would like to give the stage to our first speaker, that is Eric Vétillard from ENISA. There he is lead certification expert at the ENISA, that is the EU agency for cybersecurity, since 2019. He's technical coordinator of certification activities, in particular regarding cloud services and European digital identity wallets. So his presentation is about building assurance about IoT supply chain security that is related to the fact that IoT products are composite products, and he will introduce how security features are impacted by that. So, stage is yours.
All right, so good afternoon. I'm going to be talking a bit about how to build assurance. This is basically, of course, talking about certification, because this is what the team that I belong to is doing. So although we have not been working explicitly until today on the certification of IoT devices, we have a few schemes that are in the way or finished, like the common criteria that can be used for some devices, and also the scheme for cloud services that could also be used for that. So we've been looking at these things a bit carefully from the beginning. Something that I would like to start with is a little bit of shameless advertising for some of the deliverables that are done by ENISA regarding cybersecurity challenges. So we've been doing a number of deliverables related to that, in particular one that is the threat landscapes. So there is a general threat landscapes that is revised every year, and then we have a few sectoral threat landscapes that are there. We will see that, of course, the supply chain is in there. We've also have been doing some work in the past few years, it is more recent, about trying to do some foresight. And one of the topics that was selected as a good idea to look at into the foresight was the threats. So if we look into these deliverables, you can see that in the 2023 threat landscape, of course, you find in good position the supply chain threats. I would say that in terms of volume, the supply chain threats are not enormous in terms of particular incidents, but I think there's been a number of threats that have, I would say, created some havoc in terms of getting everybody to fix the problem in time. So it may not have led to a significant number of incidents, but it's still something that is very much present and that is being exploited from time to time. So if you look into the report, you'll see that it's definitely not one of the most commonly found threats. I think ransomware is way above that, but it's still there, and it's been there all the time. And I think another interesting thing is that it's foreseen as being something major. So it's actually the #1 threats identified in the foresight about threats. And this is because we see more and more that we have close calls of threats, or things that are found related to the supply chain that are caught in time, but were still dangerous. I mean, there's been this now famous Microsoft engineer very recently worried about this half-second lag that definitely hit something interesting. This one was caught once again. Yeah, maybe the next one will be exploited for years before anything happens. So I think this is something that we see as being very much important and also as more or less as a growing threat into the future. So if you look at it, for instance, what the way they describe it in the foresight is the fact that in addition to what we get to that, we may also have some more or less some 0 days, or basically, somebody with some means. So of course, they're always mentioning state-sponsored actors would insert a backdoor somewhere. As we know, I mean, there are many projects that are built, more or less, particularly with open source, but not only, in which the sheer size of the code makes it more or less impossible to look at everything. We all know that a backdoor doesn't have to be anything obvious; it can be very well hidden. So, yeah, this is the kind of things, the kind of threats that is definitely present in a lot of people's minds here. So, trying to look at the way we can deal with the supply chain. I'll just take one step of the chain. So of course, the chain can be much longer than what we have here with a cloud service that has some sub-services and a customer, but you can basically repeat this in a much higher stack here. One of the interesting things is that when we certify cloud services, we look at the full stack. So the suppliers are in the scope of certification. The reason is, of course, obvious. If you use somebody else's infrastructure and you want to get certified that the security is right, you have to demonstrate that this infrastructure on which you rely is okay as well. Otherwise, it makes no real sense. So when you define cloud services, you need to define some requirements. And first, you're going to define some controls that have to be implemented by the sub-services. So we call them the complementary sub-service organization controls. And then you define some requirements on these controls. And you do the same thing on the other side, which is you define some controls that are to be implemented by the customers. So if you think about cloud services, this is something very typical, in particular, when you are using an infrastructure. These infrastructure providers, they will give you some tools, for instance, a tool for storage of information. Now, if you don't set it up correctly, if you don't set up the proper authentication or protection, access control, etc., you get no security, which means that in order to reach the objectives of the scheme, we have the responsibility that is split between the cloud provider and the cloud customer. I mean, this is very typical in cloud, but of course it also applies in certification. So one of the requirements for being certified is to share, to make sure that the vendor shares with their customers what is expected from the customers. So now if we look what happens when we do the assessment, so the first thing we do is, of course, making sure that we do have assurance that actually the sub-services implement the controls and satisfy the requirements on the CSOCs. Then we ensure that the requirements of the customers are sufficient, appropriate, and that they share with the customers. And then there's a third thing that is being done, which is making sure that the cloud service actually implements the customer controls from their own sub-services. So if you build your cloud service on top of somebody else's infrastructure, you make sure that you satisfy the customer requirement of that service. So there's only one that is kind of missing here, which is that because the customer at this point is not known, there is no way to know beforehand when you're getting certified that the certified cloud service will actually satisfy the needs of the customers. The customers have to assess that themselves. So this is grayed out here. But if you look at this particular definition and process, this is something that is kind of universal. Whatever happens when you build a supply chain, if you don't have a clear idea, whether it's functional or security, what you need from your vendors, and on the other hand, you don't have a clear idea also about you need, what they need from you, what you need to do in order to use the thing correctly, most likely the supply chain is going to go wrong. So I think that this is this little diagram here where we make sure to define the right requirements, but also to make sure that these requirements, when they're not fulfilled, is essential. So this is really the basis of getting the supply chain right. It's always the same. Huh? If someone tells you we do everything and we get 100% security in any situation, it's most likely not true because it's too good to be true. And obviously, there's always something that you will have to care about, and there are always some limits on what a product can provide or service can provide in terms of security. One way that we're using to deal with the supply chain is the composite certification. So the composition in particular in common criteria. This is very common used there. So the idea here is that it works very well when you have a supply chain that is along a single scheme. So if you have things that are something that is certified in common criteria using another product that is certified in common criteria, etc., that works well. So typically we have that with in the smart card world, where every smart card that you have in your wallet, typically you're going to have a certificate from on the hardware, then you get a certificate on the hardware plus some platform to run applications with the Java Card Global platform, and finally you get another one for the full platform, including the application. So all of this works quite well. We also have composition, which is proposed for cloud services. So it's basically on a similar way. The other one is that basically the principles of composition are always the same, and it's basically what is used as the basis for certification. Now the next thing is about the CRA. So the CRA requirements here, it's basically the same. Huh? They're usually implemented in part by the components of a product. So typically, you would see something like the management of updates. This is something that you need to do. You need to have an update mechanism, but it doesn't mean that if you provide some kind of a mobile application, you're going to implement an update mechanism. Most likely, you're going to use the one that is provided by the underlying device or operating system or whatever. And if you're writing an operating system, you're going to rely on the mechanism that is provided by the chip vendor to do the secure boot. So we have exactly the same mechanisms where you need to know exactly what you're looking for, and you need to know what whatever supplier or whatever you're using actually requires from you. So if you look about what is there, we have this idea about, we need to be demonstrating, right? So it kind of looks like composition, what is required in the CRA. So you have an obligation in the regulation to monitor the supply chain, but it's not an essential requirement. So it's not something that you have to demonstrate a priori. Now, if you look at the obligations, more precisely in the CRA, I mean, we understand that securing the supply chain is obviously a goal of the CRA. They've been talking a lot about how components can be used to make the overall products more secure. And there's also this article that I was just mentioning earlier, where you have to do due diligence to making sure that the components you have don't compromise cybersecurity. But once again, it's an article, so it's not part of the requirements. So you don't have to do anything. So if your component has been placed on the EU market, this is usually quite simple. It has to comply to the CRA. Then there should be documentation available, which happens to require a description of the responsibilities of the user, so you're fine. Now, what may happen is that you may get into a situation where you're using components that themselves are not being placed on the EU market. So you can have your product that is actually built outside of Europe based on some components that are for sale outside of Europe, but not in Europe. So what do? They don't have to comply to the CRA. So you have a problem here. There's also an issue with the free and open source software, because in some cases they don't have a requirement to do the same thing. So here you still have a due diligence to satisfy, but the basis on which you need to do it is not clear, because there's no requirement in the CRA for you to be guaranteed that you will get the information you need. So it's again something interesting here that we have to maybe, I'm sure that some other speakers will talk more about this, but although it's not directly required by the ex-ante requirements in terms of demonstrating compliance, you still at some point need to demonstrate that your product does not contain vulnerabilities. Of course, the product includes its components. So if you don't have any, I would say, good idea that the components that you are using do not contain vulnerabilities, then demonstrating this thing will be difficult. And it's the same for a number of the requirements. Demonstrating that your product is free of defects or is minimal or whatever. If you integrate components for which you have no clue whether they meet all of this, of course, it makes things more difficult. So this is something where you have to be very careful. And I think it's that there's an interesting debate to come, in particular about the open source, which is what it means for a vendor to use a piece of software for which they don't necessarily have the information that they would need to demonstrate that they are compliant to the CRA. So this is going to have to be solved in some way, somewhere. So here, I think that the main thing is that we don't have, yet at this time the full visibility on the CRA. I think there will be some standards coming, so hopefully we will have something like that will help us understand. But it's very clear already that the supply chain is already a challenge. I mean, just looking at the supply chain, I haven't mentioned at all the remote data processing, but this is yet another piece where there will be some dependencies on cloud services or other services where we need to understand how they mix all together. If you look at the current certification schemes, they will have a limited impact, mostly because, of course, all of them will be targeting a limited number of services. So the infrastructure that we use for certification cannot multiply extremely fast. So it will remain something where we'll have tens or hundreds of certificates, maybe thousands, but it's not going to be the solution for all the products, or even for all the products that need to demonstrate through a third-party assessment here. So harmonized standards is going to be most likely the most important part, and it's not an easy one. I think that they're struggling today to make sure that these requirements would allow a self-assessment, because otherwise we'll have to analyze millions of products, which is a bit more difficult. And finally, I think we also have to make sure that all of this works well with the rest. So we have NIST 2 coming up with all the national regulations. Also, there are more and more documentation is being prepared for, I'd say, being more precise on the requirements that important and essential entities will have to meet. So the AI Act here also will do the same for the AI. Thank you. By the way, I would not be in the final thing. So if there's, but I don't see any open questions. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eric, for this interesting presentation and these insights. Since we have now some time, since one speaker is not able to join, there is also the opportunity to raise some questions directly to you with respect to your presentation. So if anyone from the audience has any question, don't hesitate to type it into the chat using the Q&A tool at the bottom. However, I have some questions in the meantime regarding what you presented there, and if I understood it correctly. So as you said, as products developed abroad, not in Europe, will not be subject to the European regulation. Might this lead to locking out products not developed in the European Union?
So it's not about it's not about being developed in the European Union. It's about being put on the market. So this is quite different. So if a vendor puts a product on the market, makes it available to EU customers, then they have to satisfy the CRA requirement. That doesn't depend where the product was developed. So it's the same with basically the cybersecurity becomes a component of the CE marking. So a lot of things that are made outside of Europe get a CE marking. It's just now that it's becoming a little bit more difficult to get it if you, or a lot more difficult, I don't know, if you have any electronic component in it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually the point of my question. So if European vendors developing a product and buy something, a component from the United States or from another region that is not subject to the European regulation, so who needs to fulfill the requirements in the regulation? Because the European manufacturer would not be able to do what is necessary to be done by a vendor from the United States that is not directly developing for the European market, but just selling something.
I think that there will, I think that there will be, I would say, quite likely some growth problems when they will be established, when we get into force. Of course, some non-EU vendors will have not foreseen that they needed to do something, that they would not have done it. Yeah, that's life. But I think that people have to go and discuss with their vendors because they have to make sure that this happens correctly. And I think that there will be also a lot of communication. There are some exchanges also on this topic, for instance, with the US. It's something that is being discussed. The US is setting up a more voluntary approach, but they are setting up something. So, we are talking with them. I mean, the commissioner. So, hopefully, there will be at least enough convergence so that claiming compliance would not be that difficult. If you satisfy the requirements in the charge of the US, for instance, for IoT, you shouldn't be that far from the requirements of the CRA. Or at least, I would say even that as soon as you have, I would say, a structured way of dealing with security, you're already on the track. The real problem is for the companies who are just not doing it. I'm afraid that there are many who are in scope of CRA and not doing anything about security. Those, of course, will feel the pain.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks a lot for the answer. We have already one question from the audience. There's a question, does a unique number could help traceability of components? So I'm not sure how unique number is meant, in which way.
I mean, yeah, we will always have the problem, but that's a typical problem anyway. I mean, because even before we get the cybersecurity requirements, a lot of products are subject to other requirements, so they don't always have numbers. So, yeah, this is a problem in supply chains. We would love to have a unique thing, and I'm not sure it exists really anywhere, sadly. Yeah.
Okay, we have already another question. Does it mean including any components without CE cybersec means ad hoc due diligence?
Well, that needs to be clarified. I mean, and I want to, it's the same. I don't know what happens with the other thing. This is what we need to look at. If you integrate a component that doesn't have a CE marking today, what does it mean? I mean, that's the thing. So it will be the same. there's no reason for it to be different. So if you don't have a CE marking for safety, then can you integrate this thing? Well, maybe if it has enough documentation, but it's the same thing as for safety. You need to demonstrate that the thing would not have whatever, electrocute people, and that it would not create vulnerabilities. It's kind of the same level, and I don't think it will be more difficult, and I don't think it will be easier. It will be the same as for the other problems related to safety.
Okay, so there was a follow-up question to explain what is meant. So that if there's ad hoc due diligence, is there some extra liability implications for the final manufacturing?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would definitely say yes. The liability is always the same. I mean, you take the liability for your product. If there is someone, if you can demonstrate that someone claimed to do something and then failed to do it, it's easy to get back to them and say, hey, you said you were compliant and you're not. If they didn't say they were compliant, well, then you make the decision of using it anyway. And yeah. So of course the responsibility is a bit more engaging.
Yeah. Okay. So if there is another question, so can we hope for mutual recognition of schemes with European countries outside the EU, not with European, with countries outside the European Union soon? So is there some mutual recognition of schemes planned with the United States, for instance?
So we do have, every scheme includes provisions for the conditions for mutual recognition. I think for the common criteria, of course, these discussions will start very soon because there's already, some mutual recognition in place. So it's just a question of extending it to this new scheme. For the cloud services, it's going to be a bit more difficult. I think other countries have their own programs, maybe not with the same scope, but so I would guess that it would take a bit longer. For IoT, I don't know, but I think that mutual recognition, between schemes, saying that we recognize a certificate, is kind of a dream that could happen, but may not be the most important thing. The most important thing would be to say maybe that to recognize mutual recognition of evidence. That would be already quite good. So if you can say that if you've been certified, whatever, in the US for using this particular scheme, then we accept some of the evidence. I think this is something that would already simplify greatly. That's what we're trying to do also with the UCS in particular, making sure that the reuse of evidence is possible.
Okay, and another question related to that. So, how can current European certification schemes, or I think upcoming as well, have more impact, e.g. on the international level? So do you think there's also some impact on the worldwide regulation based on what the European Union does?
I think it can. I mean, if you look at, to take one example, if you look at, for instance, what happens around the smart cards with common criteria, because that's an example that's dates from 10 to 20 years ago. It was mostly a European thing at the beginning. And then it became the de facto standard. So of course it is a worldwide standard, so it's easier for the ones to adopt it. But even countries who have nothing to do with common criteria, they will not issue a smart card that is not, doesn't have its common criteria stamp in many cases because they don't want to take the risk. So I think it can happen. We just have to have good and relevant schemes. If they are good and relevant, then some people will use them. That's it. And then we can go and talk about mutual recognition, etc. And for instance, we developed something for the cloud in Sensenelec. Maybe at some point, ideally we should talk with some other countries and try to go with ISO on this and try to get something more, make it more relevant for the rest of the world. But let's make it happen in the EU first. We're still ramping up, so it's. Let's make sure it works well inside.
Yeah. So what is your personal impression about the current regulation? How well does it contribute to supply chain security?
as I said, I mean, what we have today, we're kind of good in terms of supply chain security. CRA has a lot of intentions, a few holes. I mean, as I said, there are two major ones. One of them being the products that are not put in the market in the EU, and the other one being some of the open source, which is excluded in terms of requirements. But it's still already a nice step ahead, and I think that the latest version of the CRA introduces at least some mechanism, some kind of voluntary mechanism for these open source to be able to actually develop the evidence they need. But I think that the most important thing is that we are getting into a world where more and more there is a responsibility of putting on any market something with flaws, and people are starting to realize that. So the EU goes a step further, perhaps, than the US, but if you look at it, the US always says that they have some things that are not mandatory. Well, they're not mandatory, or they're only used for some things, but then they will become mandatory for selling to the maybe to the federal government, and then the local governments will need to say, well, yeah, same for us, because they don't want to develop new criteria. And in the end, something that was not mandatory ends up being required for half of the market. So in the end, it's required because you don't want to lose access to half of the market. So we'll see how it happens, but I guess that it's going to be more difficult in terms of cybersecurity to put something on the market. And I think that more and more the idea of saying, I don't care about security is going to be less and less acceptable.
Yeah. Okay, so one more general question, maybe as a final question before we continue with the next speaker, that is related to the increase of or the expected increase of supply chain attacks. So what do you think? What is the origin of that? Why are they getting more and more important?
I think I mean, just look at the events we've had in the past few years. I mean, the latest one, I think, is the most telling. There was some guy, who already planted a very nice backdoor in some Linux components, and it was just about to be exploitable, and then got caught by chance. Well, I mean, we're not going to get lucky every time. Most likely, we're not. I mean, what I would tend to say is that just looking at statistics, it means that some other guy is being lucky and is currently exploiting a supply chain attack on Linux or on something else. And we don't know, because we don't know, we haven't found it.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, which is that, I mean, we cannot be super lucky every time, and it's not that difficult to make these kind of attacks. So Linux is, of course, the one of the top things. So it's one of the most difficult, most likely to do, but there are many more spaces where you can enter, some code, and not many people will notice. So.
Okay, many thanks, Eric, for your interesting presentation, and also for staying ready for questions and answers. So I propose that we continue with the next speaker. Unfortunately, one is not able to join, so we will directly continue to our third presentation that will be held by Antonio Skarmeta. So he's holding a PhD in computer science and a full professor at the University of Murcia in Spain. So he has worked for different research projects regarding network security and IoT. He also coordinated much of them, and he's also involved in different standardization organizations such as IETF, ISO, and ETSI. And in his presentation, Antonio will show the approach from the DOS project for supporting the certification process using the digital device security part, or DSP. So, Antonio, the stage is yours.
Okay, so many thanks for the presentation, and thanks for the invitation to this workshop. So, as already said, my name is Skarmeta from the University of Murcia. In here, I'm going to present basically the approach that we are having in the context of the DOS project regarding how we understand we can support basically the supply chain, the security of the supply chain, by the use of some tools that we are designing as part of the project in that sense. Okay, so first of all, just to show you very broadly what is the DOS project about in that sense. So basically, this project that has started beginning of the year, we basically are focusing on trying to design a secure by design methodology that can take into account the supply chain different aspects of the supply chain, taking into account the monitoring, components testing, and in general architectural modeling. Basically, having in mind or having as a vision, basically, to have to integrate some of the ideas that were just presented, and I think it's very nice that I come here with this presentation regarding what the European Cyber Resilience Act is asking for the supply chain, but also connected to what NIST 2 is also asking about the certification process in that sense. So in our context, and this will be the central topic of the presentation here, is we are defining what we call the device security passport in some sense. You will see later is an object that will try to help and facilitate the automatic management, basically, of the different security properties that we can have on complex and not necessarily in one IoT, but also linked to what we just mentioned in the case of the composition of different elements that constitute a device. So that we can facilitate basically the management of the vulnerabilities or the identification of vulnerabilities, but also to help manufacturer to address basically the complete life cycle. And when we mean complete life cycle, I think it's important to mention, and you will see later, that we understand, and I think it's part also of the CRA, how it has been seen, is it is not that when we are talking about the security and the certification, is not a static process. It's something that should be dynamic. It will be a continuous monitoring process in order to identify maybe new threats, new vulnerabilities, and based on that, obviously, to create a recertification process. So here, our main idea is how to provide mechanisms that help the definition, basically, of what are the requirements, the security requirements that are being introduced by the different components that are part of the system, how to continue monitor basically how they are behaving, what are the possible new vulnerabilities, and also how to address the issue of maybe collection, certain kind of attestation information about the behavior of the device in that sense. At the end, what we want to provide is a mechanism that facilitates the control for the different stakeholders that participate on the supply chain at the end. Concretely, what we call the device security passport at the end is a machine readable document, basically, that we want to make available so that we can include as much information as we can regarding the different security aspect of the different products in that sense. And also to try to include, if that's possible, the idea about possible mitigation that should be applied in case of known vulnerabilities that can be applied. For doing that, what we already are analyzing, and you will see later one of the approach that we are having in that sense, also connected to the possible collaboration with the other area of the Atlantic, is the issue about what are the actual, I would say, mostly used standards or quasi-standard, if you want, or de facto standard regarding the description of several properties of the devices and the IoT and the components that they already are part of it. No? So for that, we are checking basically what is happening in the software of build, the hardware of build, the manufacturer profile description file, specs, and many other aspects that we are touching. No? And one of the ideas here that we have from the beginning was to try to see how we can extend, in some sense, some of these documents, these files. For example, specifically, we start by the extension of the mood file. That is something that is already being used extensively in the area of networking, specifically, in order to provide additional properties and information that can be used either during the process of generation of the device, but also later on the onboarding, and also during the life cycle and the operational part of the device. But I mean, the idea here is not to use only one, but that's why we are checking, for example, what can be provided by the mood file, what can be provided BEX, S-bond, H-bond, and all the other in that sense. At the end, what we want is to integrate as much as we can from all this information. In some case, maybe not necessarily creating a new document, but creating links and connections to the part of that document that are relevant for the process of the security of the supply chain in that sense, so that they can be used later easily in the different steps that we can have, either in the certification process or in the, as I said, in the process of the onboarding of the device on the secure context and so on. So this is basically at the end what we want to try to facilitate with the creation of this device security passport. At the end, our objective is to define this format and data models that we will cover, so that we can also check it against, obviously, the different standard, also to check about how it can be used in the context of the CRA, the certification process, and so on. But at the end, with the main focus, as I said, to create a secure automated process of all the process in our platform that you will see later, where we have several of these steps in that sense. Okay, so from the point of view of the supply chain, as we see it in the context of DOS, here you can see a little bit the different steps that we already have organized. That there are different steps, different phases, where basically we can use the information that we are generating with the DSP, as already mentioned. For example, you can see here that we have what we call a product security assurance that will be mostly linked to the design process. In some sense, where basically the main idea is that we will bring together information about hardware, software evaluation, testing that we can carry out, and all of them can be integrated as part of the information that we can provide associated with the DSP. The main idea is that this DSP, this document, should be something that, as I already said, reflect how the device or the system is being composed, and what is the security properties that we already are able to get assurance about the behavior, and how, this is an important aspect, how we understand that that system need to be used in the context of security. This is quite linked to the idea of the common criteria, where you can have different profile. So here is the idea is also to attach different profile, or specify the kind of profile associated to the device, where we can we can demonstrate, or we can verify that the security properties already explain detail on the DSP are being fulfilled. In that sense, there's another part, as you can see here, that go more on the distribution, I would say, or operational phase, if you like, that we have divided in two main blocks. One of them could be like the pre-installation of the device in your context, where we can do a kind of security validation in that sense, through the use of some kind of digital twin tools that will read from all this information that we already generate to understand if the device is correctly being deployed in a scenario that is consistent with what is being described on this document, this automatic document. And at the second part, there will be operational time or runtime, as you can see here, with the idea that once we are validate them, we can onboard, we can enforce basically some of the security properties that already been described on DSP in some case. In other case, we can provide certain kind of configuration information that need to be also deployed. And at the same time, the idea is that we will continuously monitor that what already has been specified as part of the security properties, they already been fulfilled. This is why we have here different tools also that will continue to monitor this stuff, but also, and not only about that, that in any case, in a certain moment, any kind of additional vulnerability are being detected, if there's an update of the DSP, and so on, we will be able to reinstantiate or redeploy or reinforce basically this information in the during the runtime operation. In the worst case, is the kind of vulnerability already been detected are quite significant. That will be implied that the device maybe is being decommissioned, and at the same time, the manufacturer will need to have a recertification, and when the recertification is done, we will be able to do a redeployment, onboarding again of the device on the operational side. So that is basically the complete flow that we see in our part, where, as you can see here, the DSP is a central piece because it's providing information in the design phase, during the validation previous to the deployment, and finally on the onboarding of the device on the concrete security context where it's going to be used in that sense. In all the time, and at the same time, sorry, to monitor it continuously, so that if something changed, etc., it can be again reconsidered and redeployed in that sense. At the end, a little bit just linked it again to the idea of the certification process. And the idea that is behind, for example, NIST 2 and the certification on the CRA, here is a little bit what we see the life cycle of the system, where you can see there's a phase where is the design phase, where you can model, do the testing, as already was seen, and so on. Then there can be a creation of the device in some sense by the generation of the DSP. This DSP plus the different tests then can go to a certification process so that they can be validated, so that we can understand that the DSP as a descriptor of the security properties of the device are already consistent with what already have been indicated by the manufacturer, so the device is ready to be obviously deployed or sold, basically, if you like, by any entity. Then you have the second part, that is basically the organization is the one that is going to use the system. They will have a first plate, that is the deployment, where basically we will use the information from the DSP to understand how it should be deployed, how to be enforced, maybe certain kind of, as I already said, security measures in order to properly execute how the device can be properly used on the device. And then there will be a phase where we will be continuously monitoring, analyzing if there's any kind of new threats, receive information from the CTIs and from the different SOCs, so that in any change of the DSP, in some case they will be directly apply, and in other cases, as I already said, if it's too heavy or too critical, then it will be imply decommissioning of the device until it is being finally updated by the manufacturer with a new DSP that is again being certified by the corresponding entity in that sense. So as you can see here, the main idea is that, as I said, that having this document in a machine readable format, they should facilitate that the different entities that are participating in all the life cycle, they could help basically in some sense in the process of reading it, applying it, enforcing, or just considering any kind of measure against the user. At the end, what you can see here is what we see basically the general approach of how the DSP is central in all this process. It should support the certification process, because basically during the manufacture, we will create, for example, the list of components using the BOM, the expected behavior using the mood, provide recommendation configuration or mitigation actions that should be applied in case of certain conditions. Then will be the certification, etc. There will be the deployment with the use of this device so that it can be secure, configure the device on the context profile, on the specific profile that is being conceived. Then we have the operation part, and then, as already said, again, the upgrading or the decommission in case something is needed to be changed or just for a reuse in another context of the device in that sense. So at the end, we are supporting, as I already said, all the life cycle in that sense. So what is this DSP? Again, I mean, basically we call it in this moment, we don't have a final, just for you to notice, we don't have a concrete final representation. You will see later what are the initial ideas that we are having. But at the end, what I already mentioned is what we want is not to create another document. So basically, we are calling like a metadata structure, a metadata schema that maybe have links to different of the existing document that already exist. And that they are already being provided by either the manufacturer or by a third party in that sense. So here you can see a little bit the list of the issues that we are envisioning. So how to include the different components, how to include the list of hardware and software components. As I already said, follow a similar structure to the mood, how to provide behavioral information and certain policies that should be applied. The use of ideas similar to come from the threat mood approach that also allow to provide you threats and mitigation that can be applied in the context of new vulnerability, and also provide, for example, the vulnerability tracking for included evidence on the behavior of the device. Okay, at the end, all of them are obviously should be part so that they can be used or different part of this structure of this document can be used, as you can see here, by different stakeholders. Sorry, depending on what is the main interest they already have. One of the schema that we are looking for now, and this is something that I already mentioned, that is it could be a nice collaboration also with what is happening in the other side of the Atlantic, and specifically what is doing now the NIST, is to think about a structure similar to what they are proposing about the OSCAL. OSCAL is an approach that is now being considered, where basically it's similar to what we were talking about. It's a meta scheme where basically they have several, I would say, subsections that can be applied for different functionalities, so that you can use them depending on your needs, I would say, in some sense, or the objective that you want to use that document. So similar to what we mentioned about the DSP. So there's, for example, an assessment layer where basically you can put some kind of actions or plan for evidence management. You have an implementation layer where basically you can indicate how this device, similar to the profile, is going to be instantiated, or similar to what the mood, for example, is doing. And there's another one, like a control layer, that is more about the different profilings and different catalogs, where basically the sources document that you will use in order to fill the other section in that sense. So we already have, I'm not going to be going in data because, we are over the time, but basically, as you can see here, and you can see, basically the idea is that different blocks that we mentioned here, with the thread mode, the VEX, the update, etc., they can be connected to some of the layers. Another one could be linked to the S-bond, H-bond, the mood, and maybe the certificates. And finally, for the security control, we can include either some aspect like, for example, risk information and so on. In that sense, here you can see some example of how we are now working on how it can be used in that sense. So the catalog basically and the profile is mostly linked to the regulation in that sense, that should be connected to the machine readable way. As I already said, in some cases, not that we replicate or duplicate what already exists. It's basically that we connect linkage to whether this information is available. For example, in the case of the certificates, that now is going to be requested by the manufacturer in Europe. Basically, that will be a place where basically you will need to go and recover that certificate showing the security properties. There's another section I already said that is more regarding to the claims that we can face, so that will be the basic for the certification process. And then, as already mentioned, for example, the MOOD, the S-bond, and the H-bond can be either the certificate that will be included, can be part of this other section about the control or the system implementation in that sense. So at the end, and also, as already mentioned, any evidence that we can create in that sense about attestation, evidence collection that are important for the certification process and for the recertification, as already was mentioned also in the previous presentation, they can be also included as part of another section of this scenario. There's many other information that can be considered. We are just thinking about this. So basically, as I already said, we are on this stage where we are trying to formalize basically an example of how this can work. We already have done an initial work starting from the mood and extending the mood, because basically, as I said, already there's tools that are able to use it, and we can use it as a baseline to understand the impact over the different tools. But our idea, as I already said, is to evolve it so that we can create this kind of meta schema that can be used on this scenario, and obviously discuss with other projects, plus obviously the Commission, about this, how can be connected to the actual effort of the European certification process. No? So as I said, another information that may be considered, but basically now we could be in the future also, about security incidents response plan, for example, that can be applied depending on the kind of vulnerability, either the protection of the privacy, certain privacy and data protection measure that can be also be part of this, and also aspect like secure boot and firmware integrity and so on. No? So I think the point here is that we don't want to integrate. First, we need to go step by step, so to integrate the basic information, and then to facilitate the way that any of this additional information can be extended later as based on this machine readable format that we are proposing in that sense, that can be used by other entities in that sense. So just to conclude, as I said here, we understand that the idea of this digital security passport can facilitate or ensure the trust and the transparency the transparency, because basically we have information that is where you can assure or you can get a certain level of trust on it, because it's basically integrated by the information provided by entities. Sorry, by the different entities that are participating on the design of the system. It can facilitate the security information exchange in that sense, because basically we are able to, as I already said, being machine readable, it will facilitate the introduction and the provision information between the different stakeholders about the system. Several of them can interact with the DSP and also provide, as I already said, new evidence in the way that they are behaving, for example, and will manage basically, it can facilitate some aspect regarding the cascade effect, as we will be able to connect the different components that are part of the system. No, so it's similar to what already was mentioned about this composition certification. So something that facilitates to integrate information coming from the different entities, and we put them together so that we can show the flow that is happening between the different subparts, I would say. No? And obviously, this will be in a machine readable format integrated with tools. Obviously, they will facilitate the certification and the provision and the generation of compliance mechanisms in an automatic way. And obviously, all of this stuff is clearly aligned with what just was presented about the CRA and basically the management of the life cycle of the devices on the system in that sense. So as I already said, it is not a static view, it's something that should be taken into account in the complete whole cycle, taking into account not only something that happened at the beginning with the design, but also what happened during the deployment, what happened during the operational phase, and being able to quickly react to new updates that we can have in the future. That's all from my side. Please visit us to our project where you will have more information and how we advance and we are going ahead with this schema. Thanks.
We continue with our next speaker in the agenda. That is Gisela Meister from Eurosmart. So she is Senior Security Advisor on behalf of Eurosmart, and she represents in the European Expert Group on Radio Equipment. She's also a member of the CEN like JTC 13 Working Group 8 on the development of harmonized standards for the RWD Delegated Act on Security Items, and was also preparing standardization work regarding the Cyber Resilience Act at the Joint DKE Cybersecurity Committee. And she's also engaged in the development and maintenance of consumer IoT standard series EN 303.645, I think, which many of you are already aware of. In her presentation, Gisela will talk about supply chain security challenges in the context of consumer IoT. And I would like to ask you, Gisela, to present, and stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Then I will start. Super.
Hear and see everything.
So I start just with the next slide. I think this is well known to you already from the 4 speakers to say, okay, these supply chain security challenges are of course connected with the upcoming EU regulations for IT. And the good news are actually we had already regulations on the market which are now, I think, linked to security issues. That is to speak of first the red delegated regulation from the radio equipment context, concentrated and focused on devices. Then NIST 2 cloud services. We talked about this GDPR, personal protection of personal items, and the cyber resilience, which envelope, I think, all, and therefore I think it's and provides actually, according to the new legislative framework as well as the radio equipment directive, then performance-based requirements. That means technology-neutral requirements, so on a rather high level. And therefore, I looked on high-level challenges as well here to meet this. And there was ENISA was one of the 4 speakers, had already baseline security recommendations in 2017 and updated them frequently. And these security challenges, which are very high level, can be as well focused on supply chain management. As such, That's, for instance, insecure design or development for any supply chain link as well, lack of interoperability across different IoT components, fragmentation in existing regulations. That means which regulations you should apply on, and are they linked accordingly, actually, that there are no gaps. I think that is very essential in the moment as well, that the manufacturer knows what to do, actually. And what's very important, I think, for the consumer is a lack of awareness and knowledge, e.g. about vulnerabilities, as well, of course, for the between the supply chain links. But as I said, for the consumer, it's a last link for such a supply chain. It's important to know as well. And a lack of proper product lifecycle management, which will be included actually in the CIA. So these are challenges, and I think this has not only to meet with the regulations, but as well with the foreseen standards coming up from the standardization request. I think for the red we had already, we are nearly at the end for the standardization. I was a member of this in 10 as well. For the Cyber Resilience Act, we are preparing already standards in line with, I think, not finalized standardization requests, but some last version of it, so that we can already start the work, because it's otherwise very strict and very straightforward to meet then the final dates. So Cyber Resilience Act, I do not have to tell you, but just to say again, product agnostic cybersecurity requirements, so high level, I would say, vulnerability handling requirements, very important, and product specific cybersecurity requirements for certain verticals to be handled. And the standardization landscape we have already is already very, I think, good from the starting point. We have from CEN-CENELEC, we have working groups which would care about base, I think, horizontal standardization issues. That means process-oriented, harmonized standard-based publications. And for the consumer IoT, there we have already EN from ETSI, TC Cyber, which cares about consumer IoT and already provided high-level, as well high-level requirements, which are worldwide adapted. That's the good news already. And so I think this is a very good point to start on to see how this could be coordinated together with put under the CRR in the following as a vertical maybe. So just let me tell you something about the ETSI consumer IoT universe. And there, I think we, as I said, we had several standards and European standards, which were already covered. The challenges, I think I will show you in a minute, which I from ENISA, and there will be an update, or is an update as a technical standard, now going to be a European standard as well, about reporting vulnerability management processes and data protection. I think that means that the challenges coming from ENISA could be fulfilled, and this is as such. So this was, I remind you, insecure design under development. There is a chapter about make systems resilient to outrage, the lack of interoperability across different IoT component devices, secure communication between chain links, fragmentation in existing regulations. This is maybe adapted for the Cyber Resilience Act, very important actually, that there is no link between or gap between different regulations, so that they're built on. And I think that's already as well very important, and the lack of awareness and knowledge. That means reporting of vulnerabilities, for instance, and the lack of proper product life cycle management, keep software update. So there are already chapters. I show you the content here in a nutshell, actually, so that the ETSI standard is already very good, I think, as base, I think, for adapting major challenges, and so could be used as such. Yeah, then last not least, I would show you further information if you are interested. And there are a lot of already ETSI TS technical standards available. And as I said, that then works actually as well on the base of harmonized standards for the horizontal standard, even if the standardization request is not final, but actually to meet the very strict dates actually to deliver them. So, and this is, I think, something where we can build on and could use, I think, what is already available, but nevertheless, I think there's a lot to do, nevertheless, I would say. So, just in a nutshell, very fast, because 10 minutes are not so much, but nevertheless, I think I meet the line. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gisela. I think you worked on some very important building blocks in being compliant with the upcoming COA. So thanks a lot for that. Barbara, can you unmute yourself?
I think I have. How is that?
Great, we can see you as well. Very, very good.
Hey, thank you. I apologize. This has not been
No
a great
worries.
morning here. Apologies.
We are happy to have you here.
For my what I've heard has been great. It's just, yes. So I'm going to talk about the NIST cybersecurity for IoT and how we are looking at product outcomes and the supply chain implications of that. If you go to the next slide. Just to give a quick background on NIST and the IoT cybersecurity program. NIST is a non-regulatory agency and technical arm of the Department of Commerce. And NIST's mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science standards and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. And in accordance with the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, NIST develops information security standards and guidelines for federal information systems. And I just want to stress that NIST has numerous IoT cybersecurity related initiatives across NIST, and the Cybersecurity for IoT program under Katerina Megas coordinates this work. Next slide. Okay. I do want to stress that NIST is a non-regulatory agency. As such, we have more flexibility to work with industry. Within NIST, our information technology program seeks to cultivate trust in technology, including software, through advances in standards and measurement science. And the goal here of our information technology laboratory is to conduct research and develop standards and practices that build the infrastructure that works for today and tomorrow. It's fine. Next slide. Okay. IoT products are systems and components of systems. And this is a critical point that the Cybersecurity for IoT program at NIST is working to bring forward, because it's not just about the device, but about the application, specialty hardware, cloud storage, backends, platforms. All of these different components of the IoT product need to be taken into account when looking at the cybersecurity of the system and the supply chain that provides that system. Next slide. So again, this is just reiterating that the product components can be the software, hardware, backends. It's important that these all be taken into consideration. Next slide. May have heard of the new Cyber Trust Mark program. The Federal Communications Commission, which is a regulatory agency, is the lead agency for this program and approved it at the March 2024 meeting. It is using the NIST criteria, the NIST guidance on outcomes, as the program criteria. And those outcomes for cybersecurity apply across the whole product. It is a voluntary program for smart product cybersecurity labels, and it is currently targeted at consumer products. Next slide. So to complement the work on cybersecurity outcomes, NIST has developed and just issued last Wednesday for public comment an IoT product development handbook. That there is a push to look at the cybersecurity of IoT devices. Well, that is critical. It is NIST's view that it is incomplete if the cybersecurity of other product components is not considered as well, since the device and the product components will be a system, and those other components do have a relationship with the device that gives them greater access and a special place in the network. And additional components obviously are additional attack surfaces, more interfaces, more access to data, and the technical and non-technical outcomes apply product-wide. So the guidance in this product handbook is addressing how it addresses how to look at the whole product and think about, for developers to think about securability. Next slide. So again, we're looking at foundation. This is part of the product handbook, is looking at foundational concepts for IoT products, architectures, deployment scenarios, the differing roles and responsibilities of manufacturers, customers, third-party supporting entities, and from a cybersecurity perspective, boundaries, and the difference, the different components. Next slide. I do want to stress there are different needs for different roles in IoT products, in supporting IoT product cybersecurity outcomes. There's always at least two roles involved, the manufacturer and the customer. And there can be multiple other roles: cloud service providers, third-party software developers, third-party hardware component manufacturer, other manufacturers of components. And these differing roles, the key is that each contributes, and there has to be transparency across the product to what is being contributed from different roles. Next slide. So from a cybersecurity perspective, it's about clarifying responsibilities, making them more transparent, identifying physical and logical boundaries, who is responsible. If a vulnerability is detected, who is responsible for addressing it, who is responsible for pushing out patches, in what elements and what components of the system. Next slide. This is an example of the kind of architectures that are presented in the cybersecurity handbook, for product handbook. And what the handbook does is present different architectures and then discuss the implications for cybersecurity of these different architectures. Next slide. Okay, so outcomes. I've been talking about outcomes. The NIST cybersecurity outcomes are defined in terms of outcomes in order to provide maximum flexibility for the implementation to meet those outcomes. Those outcomes can become requirements as standards are applied, and that is, standards provide those detailed requirements that can identify standards that meet an outcome. Then the technical outcomes are met through deployment and instantiation of components that meet those standards. The non-technical outcomes, the product handbook discusses in terms of helpful, informative references for the kind of activities that the manufacturer and other supporting entities need to provide. And I'll discuss that further. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you. Wasn't sure if I lost the network again. The outcomes are guidelines to describe what is needed, and then standards provide that support for how to achieve an outcome. And these are applied to the target scope of consumer IoT products. Right now, the FCC for the Cyber Trust Mark has accepted the outcomes that NIST defined in its baseline for consumer products and is seeking to identify standards to support those outcomes. Next slide. Thank you. These are the baseline consumer IoT product criteria. These represent the core capabilities that need to be in all the components in order to make them securable, so that controls can be applied to those components to make them securable. Then there are 4 non-technical capabilities that need to be present in the supporting infrastructure for that IoT product. These enhance both the securability of the product and the transparency of the supply chain that supports that product. Especially through documentation is key to that transparency. Also, information and query reception, again, that taking information about vulnerabilities, being able to address questions about the securability of a product, information dissemination, how those information about how to address those vulnerabilities is pushed out, and product education and awareness, specifically about how is a product of this type maintained securely. Next slide. Okay. Again, the technical cybersecurity is those measures that are taken in the hardware and software of the IoT products components to address and reduce risks. That is, the outcomes can be satisfied by applying both general and product or sector or use case oriented standards. Outcomes for other IoT product components often rely on more general standards. That is, these are outcomes that are supported by standards. Next slide. The non-technical cybersecurity is less product specific. It's about the supporting infrastructure and the manufacturer and other supporting entities for that product. And it applies as a whole, since there has to be that transparency across the supply chain that created the product in order to support that product in the long term. Next slide. So our non-technical cybersecurity outcomes, I talked briefly about these before. The four outcomes we've identified. And then the next couple of slides indicate some of the key sub areas. Could we have the next slide? Okay. I just want to highlight some. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. There's obviously a lot of detail, and I encourage you to look at our product development handbook to see the full tables. This does not go into all of the sub capabilities in the non-technical outcomes on the slides. There's much more detail in the product handbook itself. But I do want to stress many of these are about transparency across the supply chains. What is the software bill of materials, hardware bill of materials? What are the support considerations that were used in developing the product? How are those outcomes met across all the product components? Next slide. Again, how are all the components developed? What are the secure lifecycle policies and processes associated with developing that product? What is the vulnerability management policies? And again, across the whole product. So having that traceability, that documentation across the product, so that when an issue arises, when there is a vulnerability in a component, who is responsible? How do you trace it to who is responsible for addressing that vulnerability? Next slide. Information and query reception. Again, relying on standards, looking at what are the, looking at providing that traceability. Next slide. And then information dissemination is the other side of that. They work together. Next slide. Thank you. And again, I apologize for the network issues this morning. I appreciate being here and being able to present this material. I encourage you, we just put out this product cybersecurity handbook as a draft for comment. The comment deadline is 17th of May. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Barbara. And you are not responsible for technical issues. So we are happy that you made it to help the presentation. Many thanks for that. And I think there are also questions from the audience regarding what you presented, since it seems to be very relevant. And there are also very interesting activities in the United States regarding cybersecurity of IoT. So we will discuss later on. Sorry, I missed to introduce you. So maybe just let me do that after your presentation, just to be polite. So Barbara is from the United States. So she has a PhD from the University of Connecticut in computer science. And during her career at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST in the United States, she spanned the Advanced Technology Program, the Technology Innovation Program, and the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace National Program Office. She is currently the Deputy Program Manager for the NIST Cybersecurity for IoT program, and I think this information is also relevant for the audience, since you are a very important speaker here that can also answer the question. Okay, thanks, Barbara. And I think now we can continue with our next presentation that will be held by Roland Autry from EXO. Roland is Managing Director at Vétillard and co-chair of the working group run at EXO. He's a cybersecurity certification expert with more than 15 years of experience, and is a new technology enthusiast with a current mission to bring trust to the IoT. He has achieved a series of world-first publications and is behind the development of several IoT cybersecurity certification schemes and standards in EU and at international level. His presentation highlights the significance of cybersecurity certification by composition as an affordable approach under the CRA. So Roland, the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes, we can hear and see your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's a really pleasure to be here, and indeed, actually, I'm presenting EXO, being actually the co-chair of Working Group 1, where we tackle mainly the supply chain security and trustworthiness, along with some certification topics. For those who do not know EXO, it's the European cybersecurity organization that focus on strengthening the Europe cybersecurity posture, supporting somehow the collaboration between the public and the private sector stakeholders. And this topic is going to be really focused on the composition aspects of, and I think that has been tackled a little bit at the beginning by Eric, and I think it's, you would see actually how actually that fits into the cybersecurity security of the supply chain. This slide I always start because I mean typically it's important to highlight that we are more and more surrounded by connected products. It's like everywhere in our home, offices, streets, and think unfortunately that half of these connected products are still easily hacked. This is a reality. We're experiencing it everywhere, it's what's actually really worrying is and that's something related to our topic, is the fact that companies that are making use of these connected products, buying or distributing these products, they have lack of skills, time, money, expertise to check if they are secure. And the shocking truth is that 60% of cyber attacks happen because we trust the brands we use, and these attacks, like they are really slip unnoticed as products make their way from the factory to us as being the end users. So indeed, it's all about trust. Thankfully, the CRA steps in with a powerful mandate. So as also Eric talked at the beginning from ENISA, presented the different articles that are somehow concerned in the supply chain security. Most importantly, you have to understand that CRA mandated manufacturers must really or carefully check every component they use, even the free and open source bits, to make sure they don't leave our connected products open to cyber attacks. So this isn't just about the final product. It's also about every single component that actually must pass a security or compliance check, even though, as Eric mentioned at the beginning, that this is not very special essential requirements in the CRA, it is highlighted with due diligence, and that's actually the path forward somehow to ensure that also, for example, with other regulations such as NIST directive, that it's not just the big players that need to look into that requirements. Even the small suppliers actually will be concerned, because they have to prove they are up to the task, they are compliant, and that the CRA is, with the CRA, it's expected at least to understand that the buyers would be able to make more informed decisions and at least avoid taking bad decisions. So what happens if your supplier don't follow the rules? That's a quick question, but at least on the global, general actually responsibility that you have, the stakes are really high. They could hit your wallet hard. But it's not just about money. Of course, your reputation could take a serious hit, making customers, investors, and partners think twice about trusting you. Really very important aspect. On top of that, you might find yourself somehow tangled in red tape, facing strict oversight and having to fix things fast, which can actually disrupt your business and strain your relationships. And if you've been playing fast and loose with the rules, expect to pay more for cyber insurance, because if you can get it, of course, at all, by the way, that's something that's going to become like more and more interesting to look into the upcoming years, actually, how the CRA and the cyber insurance also will be, related in a way or another, following the status of conformity to the essential requirements, and thus reducing the risks. So, but indeed, compliance could be challenging. So sticking to the rules laid down in the CRA might sound straightforward sometimes, but it's easy said than done. The technical requirements are daunting. They're demanding deep dives into products and components, details, and the security requirement that could be complex. Then there's issue of time and money. Evaluating your products and making necessary tweaks could take months and eat into your budget, especially tricky when products are updated somehow frequently. So that's why we're talking about composition. So why opt actually for composition when seeking conformity assessment on the CRA? It's all about making the process smarter, not harder. So by using components that have already been somehow conformity assessed or certified or whatever, have been like proving somehow a level of transparency that you are expecting to see, you can significantly cut down on your costs and efforts and time. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel for each new product. So more than just saving time and money, this composition is really key to building trust in the supply chain. It's like constructing and building with bricks or Legos, ensuring that every layer adds to the overall strengths of this, resilience to the final product. So that's actually basically the composition goal. But every product, when we talk about product, we should not forget the fact that it has a life cycle. So it goes through several key stages in the life cycle, and that's where we become actually, talking about supply chain and different stages up to the real end life of that product. So it starts always with the ideation and design involving different, parties that, or stakeholders, designers, manufacturers, open source community, for example, for software developments. Then the components, for example, like chips, are made by vendors and assembled into final product by manufacturers or OEMs. So at this point, typically the security critical parts could be checked against the CRA essential requirements to make sure they comply with the CRA. But with composition, the manufacturer could integrate these compliant components without needing to recheck their security, thus actually streamlining the process during the whole life cycle. So When we talk about composition, it's probably for some of you have experience in it, but not everybody, I would expect. So on the component level or product level, sorry, that we talk about, we used to talk about, for example, in common criteria, what we call layered composition, which means that involves somehow a sort of foundational component and additional parts that use its functions without changing them. So for example, like any application that is running on the OS, it's running on the chip, using, you know, the functionality, security functionality on top of that. It could be composed, meaning that product that has been reevaluated, or two components that have been evaluated separately, or one component is just evaluated, which is a baseline, and then you sort of build on top in an incremental approach to the security adherence somehow to this, you know, secure assurance level that you are aiming for. But we can talk about what we call network and bidirectional approach of composition, where somehow the components could communicate securely across somehow a network or pathway, a bit like what Barbara mentioned about the network. I mean, the fact that this IoT system of components, and it could be indeed linked. So an example could be like an app connecting to an external server. How do we actually compose that? It could be embedded composition. In this approach, typically, the components are so closely integrated, they become somehow inseparable. So often leaning somehow to a complex interaction. This is common to, for example, the software libraries used in products. So these are typical on the product level, but we talk also composition about product and processes. So you have to understand that in the CRA, it's important to see there are some potential opportunities for conformity assessment processes that will rely on indeed you proving your conformity to the essential requirements, but also proving your product production somehow lifecycle secure. So there are some processes and products that security related requirements that could be actually somehow complementing each other's, and that actually could be somehow called also composition, because some of the schemes or standards could actually be really focusing on these processes, ISMS, and others actually could be focusing on the product, and that both of them could somehow be complementing each other, so to guarantee the level of assurance or conformity to the full essential requirements. You also could talk about composition across certification schemes. So I think also that was mentioned by Eric, the fact, for example, that we could take cloud service and put maybe product that is certified under the UCC. And especially in the CRA, it's something interesting that the secure data processing or remotely secure data processing should be taken into account. So that could be, for example, running on the cloud service that potentially has been certified by ECS, let's say. How do we actually ensure that sort of composition between ECS, UCC to satisfy the, maybe in the presumption of conformity, the requirements of the CRA? But also we could look across regulations, right? So Gisela mentioned this somehow also with the relationship to the RED directive and the standards and things like that. Definitely, when we look into the, for example, the fact that the CSA with presumption of conformity is also somehow relying on standards and the certification approach to be able to presume the conformity to the CRA. We think actually that this could be, everything could be actually interrelated at some point. The GDPR, which takes care of data privacy, NIST directive that actually would rely on potential the certification schemes, which themselves have presumption of conformity towards the CRA. So that's also more or less somehow a position approach that could be taken into account there, and need to figure out all this. So as you've seen, there are many things that have to be consolidated, and many questions actually had been raised and are still actually to be explored. That's one of the reasons why we have in working group 1 in EXO actually defined like that task force and how we're working on an existing work that has been started earlier about composition, where you can get access to the latest version. But now we're tackling questions like presumption of conformity and composition. So how products meeting certain standard could be automatically recognized for their cybersecurity effort. How do we compose with this SBOM, for example, analysis? What about risk assessment, and how do we harmonize the risk assessment, the bottom-up to top-down approach, which is really very important, by the way, to make sure that there is potential composition that would work. What about multi-assurance, with products or with different classes of components that actually could, a component could fall in a class and the other one could fall in another class in the CRA. How do we ensure this multi-assurance that actually is sound? So that's what we're building on that approach. Yeah, so we'll definitely invite you to join us in this activity if you want. To wrap up, so really the path to really leverage on the CRA has to be proactive, not reactive. So really try to leverage today on automated tools as much as possible to streamline the security compliance, to make sure that you'll be able to really scale, because the products are, huge, the number of products that are going to be concerned. The CRA should guide you somehow and try to transform it into an opportunity. If you would be able to re-engage with the organizations around the EU, such as Extra, that would be great to participate and to help us also answer those questions. So yeah, so we can be able to sort of take this insight forward to solve those challenges together. So I'll end up with this, and I'll thank you. And of course, if you have any questions during the panel, I'll be happy to answer.
Many thanks for this presentation, Roland. I think there are also very interesting facts and approaches that you presented to the audience. So as already said, if you have questions, don't hesitate and use the Q&A tool at the bottom of the Zoom tool to type your questions for the panel discussion here. Our next presentation will be held by Claudio Teixeira. He is Digital Rights Legal Officer at EEUC, the European Consumer Organization, working on telecommunications, digital services, and cybersecurity. He is law graduate from the University of Coimbra and College of European, and was previously a junior legal attaché at the permanent representation of Portugal to the EU during the 2021 Portuguese Council presidency, working on the negotiations of the Digital Market Act. Claudio will provide the consumer perspective on how IoT supply chain security is essential to address consumer concerns and foster trust in connected devices. Claudio, the stage is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Martin. I thank you very much for this invitation from the side of BILC, the European Consumer Organization. It is a pleasure to be here today to offer the consumer perspective. So on our side, we're going to take a bit of a step back and try to show what has been mostly the contribution of our members when it comes to identifying the problem and then adequately to explain how are the necessary steps to address this problem need to be done via a policy change and ultimately a need for create the right incentives to ensure that we have better cybersecurity, not just when it comes to certain steps of the chain, but with an holistic approach that applies throughout to all market players that contribute to the supply chain, that contribute to the ultimate product that lands on the consumer's desk. When starting on that note, we would like to start from, let's just making sure that my slides move. They seem not to move.
They don't move.
Okay, let's try again.
So it doesn't seem to work. So could you maybe restart the sharing?
Yeah, I'll try this right now. Okay, do they move now?
Yes,
now
we can
see
see on the
the-
next slide.
Okay, there we go. Now it works. Perfect. So sorry for that. And let me try to catch up on the time I just lost you. So these are the key points we're going to just try to basically, as I told, just setting the scene. So basically how it started when it comes to identifying the challenges of consumer protection in the age of connected devices, how it started, how it's going. Then introduce precisely the game changer for us, which would be setting the right incentives, in this case, policy incentives, legal incentives to change the scenery, the Cyber Resilience Act, and ultimately how we hope that these new rules will lead to more enforcement and will clear more incentives. On that, so this is an old but gold cartoon that we used to present. It's simple, but it goes straight to the point when it comes to identifying the issue, which is the fact that for a very long time, for consumers, it has been a very, very concerning issue that IoT was virtually not a synonym of cybersecurity. It was not synonym of security at all. For a very long time, we've had no clear rules that have applied across the board to ensure that these products are ultimately made safe, but also remain safe throughout its expected use. And this has been one of the main quests of our members. This has started a long time. So for over the past decade, BILC members across Europe have been engaged very proactively in surveys and to identify clearly what are the main vulnerabilities of these products. And this is someone that I think everyone knows, and apologies if I keep bringing it up, but it's also an old gold one. Kayla, the hackable doll. And this has been one of the main points where we saw that even the most, in theory, it would seem to us innocuous or innocent product, in the end of the day, can actually cause massive harm to consumers, especially those most vulnerable. So unsurprisingly, these particular kinds of products that can not just have an easy access to the sanctum of your, the inner sanctum of your home, but most importantly to most vulnerable consumers who lack sometimes the capability to understand the risk they're taking, in this case children, that we need these particular sensitive products to take an additional, we have to take it a step further and to have an additional level of security here. But this isn't just about toys, as much as Kayla is always a very good talking point. Across your home, across your office, you'll see a lot of these products, which our members, like our Belgian member in our latest campaign, the Hackable Home campaign, have noticed that it's a very widespread problem with all kinds of vulnerabilities throughout. So, and this covers all kinds of final product manufacturers, but also all kinds of manufacturers throughout very long, complex supply chains that produce a lot of different components, and the challenges are very much out there. So the need for these transversal rules that can have a holistic approach to ensure that we can upgrade level of cybersecurity were there to be seen. How is it going today? Well, not better. As much as we would like to say things that had improved, the fact is throughout, as you can see, our consumer members continue to make these surveys and identify more and more vulnerabilities. Therefore, it has been something we've welcomed very much when we see that the steps have been taken to ensure that we would have incentives so this does not keep happening. And we recognize the situations and the reasons and the motivations why these situations keep happening. But we also do recognize that when it comes to ensuring that some of these practices can change, ultimately what we do need is the right incentives. And when you look at the situations, the basic explanations on most of the times why these situations are still happening and are still very much evident to all consumers, this is ultimately the common denominator, which is the lack of clear legal or economic incentives to make sure that this stops happening. So in the absence of these incentives, from a consumer perspective, what we say is we need to create those incentives to ensure that it is easier to comply for those who want to comply and make this product safer. That is also cheaper to ensure that we have a level playing field for those who want to make it safe, but they just can't afford it. And also to ensure that those that just want a cheap route for short term to market to stream over the competition also have to calm down, take a step back, and ensure that they respect at least some kind of basic requirements. So this is a basic way of leveling the playing field in a way that we make sure that everyone gets on board of ensuring that at the end of the day, the customer is put in the first place once again. So that is why we've welcomed essentially the Cyber Resilience Act as something that we would be more than willing to help pushing forward and improve when it comes to the policy stage. Over the past year, we've seen this proposal finally reaching its conclusion, is now in the very last stages of formalizing its adoption. And ultimately, we recognize that this essential point has been addressed when it comes to strengthening cybersecurity products, but throughout the supply chain. So I'm just going to tell you very quick what was the expectations of consumers going into this regulation. And for us, it was essentially three main points, which we like to point out right now, which is the idea of the necessity of ensuring the principle of cybersecurity by design and by default, that the companies across the supply chain would need to have clear cybersecurity baseline requirements, and they would need to follow them to ensure these products are both safe and secure when being placed on the market, but also that they remain safe while they're out there following their expected life cycle. And that is why the principle of continuous conformity, to ensure these products remain safe throughout their respective lifespan, was something that was very much important to us. And that means vulnerability handling, that means provision of security updates, and all these as well need to be make sure they're safe and secure. But also a very important incentive that for us was missing from the proposal, and to be honest, still very much missing from the proposal, which is a clear liability regime that covers the whole supply chain. And here, the issue would be for us to make sure that we have the right legal incentive to keeping them honest, to make sure that manufacturers can indeed produce safer products, but also that when the inevitable happens and things always also fail, that we cannot prevent the worst, that at least consumers have the access to seek the necessary compensation for that harm. So the idea that we can expand those rules to ensure that all players in the supply chain are covered by these rules, but also to ensure joint and several liability, was something that we're very much pushing forward. In the end, what did we get? We did get not as much as ambition as we would like, but we did get some interesting principles which we do applaud, and that is the idea that indeed we will have to make sure these products are more secure through mandatory cybersecurity requirements, but the incentives to ensure that these requirements are indeed enforced and applied are there. And here, saying a bit, coming a bit on the backdrop of what Roland already said, that we recognize the issue of the necessary keeping due diligence. So the principle of due diligence, that manufacturers must exercise due diligence when integrating components within countries, but also then the principle of continuous conformity in this in these clothes of the vulnerability handling, also when it comes to the relation of the supply chain. Just a bit more detail, but speeding up because there is time to catch up. On due diligence, we recognize and we welcome the fact that at the very least, manufacturers will need to exercise due diligence when integrating these components, and that they will indeed have to verify if these components are in conformity with the requirements that are set out in the CRA. We also welcome that some of these examples of actions have been included in the proposal, and on this part for us, it will be very, very important to see how enforcement carries out and how national authorities can indeed enforce that these are indeed taken to full extent and that these are applied. because even if these might not be enough, then definitely if there is not enough enforcement, this will be an issue for us to identify in the future. So we will be keeping an eye out when it comes to ensuring that this due diligence is kept, because to be honest, it's still very much hard for us to understand from a consumer perspective how we can ensure that manufacturers can be kept honest when it comes to their best efforts to ensure that this due diligence is indeed made. Continuous conformity. We also applaud the idea that vulnerabilities detected in products must be handled effectively, as in a general idea, but also the idea when it comes to the supply chain that manufacturers need to identify and document these vulnerabilities, including by the drafting of the software bill of materials that will indeed have to document these details on supply chain relationships. This is indeed a very good addition, and also the complementarity when it comes to ensuring if these vulnerabilities are detected, that the manufacturers won't have just to address and remediate the vulnerability, but also to be engaging with those suppliers of those components to ensure that these vulnerabilities are flagged, but also these vulnerabilities are resolved, not just in this particular case, but also across. I will try, I'm just concluding, just 1 more minute. And just one more quick on enforcement and the liability rules. Although we do not have a regime on liability rules as we would like. Sorry, someone is speaking? I'll just continue. Okay, I'll just continue. I'm almost done anyway. So let me just one more slide. So we're very much happy to see that when it comes to the liability rules that we have, even though the cyber resilience side doesn't have a clear separate liability regime, what happens is that there is a dependency on the product liability directive. The main challenge for that would be that before its revision, the product liability directive, from a consumer perspective, has some significant limitations when it comes to ensuring that it would live up to the challenge of covering smart products. So if the liability if harm comes to be, the liability of the manufacturer or the supplier, those rules would have to be fundamentally changed to ensure that we could have not just enough compensation for consumers, but the right incentive to make sure that these harms don't happen in the first place. So on there, looking at how the product liability directive has been essentially revised, we're particularly happy to see although the burden of proof for consumers, as Bill requested, has not been reversed, the burden has been substantially alleviated through a lot of presumptions, which are very much welcome to correct the asymmetries of power in these commercial relationships. But most importantly, the scope has been expanded to ensure that other economic operators beyond the final manufacturer, the final product, can also be covered. So this is for us a fundamental step to ensure that we can have more responsibility, we can have more accountability and clear liability throughout the supply chain. Still not perfect, still have to be done, and clearly a lot of eye on enforcement, but this seems to us a step on the right direction to which we'll be pushing enforcers to keep clear control on. And on that, to conclude, what then must happen next as we roll out this new legislation? There's still a long transition period, of course. So for us, just keep quick words on, given the principles we've gotten from Cyber Resilience Act when it comes to consumer products, what needs to happen next. Enforcement is clearly key because, indeed, as Roland said just before, what happens if your supplier does not comply? And that is for us a key issue that is still wide in the open, an open question. So we need to make sure that these newly empowered market surveillance authorities get the necessary means and resources to ensure proactive enforcement and avoid, of course, also enforcement bottlenecks. Shouting back to the beginning of this session, of this conference, standardization work indeed is not starting from scratch, and we must rely on available standards to get the time moving, because there is indeed no time to waste. But also there is a need to create synergies, and here is where consumer organizations come to tell that we should have indeed this expectation that there is somewhere to rely on. There is an experience, there is clearly capability for market monitoring, surveying, from consumer organizations, in which we are happy to complement the activity of enforcers, and we are happy to keep doing this job. But most importantly, it needs to be the Commission, needs to be the market surveillance authorities, also to ensure that they reach out and they take advantage, they tap into this established capability, this established capacity of these organizations to contribute to a more harmonious, to a more engaging and a more synergic capability to survey the market. So, but in the end of the day, this is fundamental, but also not forgetting the bottom line, which is the client, the customer, the consumer. So when everything else fails, the best choice you can have is empower consumers, encourage private enforcement, ensure the collective redress is present. So we encourage the organizations to ensure that manufacturers, to ensure they have mechanisms that consumers can easily come back to them, report vulnerabilities, submit complaints. If that fails, to encourage our organizations, not just organizations, but the market surveillance authorities themselves, to seek out consumers by making sure it's clear, affordable, accessible to them, to submit their complaints, to flag any vulnerabilities, and to ensure that they can actually not just get a fair shot at getting their rights defended and their voices heard, but also this can contribute to a better market surveillance, more flagging, more vulnerability identification, and at the end of the day, a greater incentive to keeping them honest and making sure we have safer products in the end, not just from the final manufacturer, but across the supply chain. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudio, for this presentation, and also with a different perspective from the consumer. That is different, I think, to most of the other presentations, and that's very interesting. We continue with the next presentation from Mihaly Zala from EY. So he has extensive experience in cybersecurity and information security of the market, governmental and critical infrastructure. He was member of various EU and NATO boards for the protection of classified data and cybersecurity, and was president of the National Security Authority in Hungary. In his current role, he is head of technology risk and cybersecurity at EY, and his presentation will be about supply chain security and resiliency. Mihaly, the stage is yours.
Yes, hello. It's really an honor that I can be here in this round, so thank you for that. Meanwhile, I try to, unfortunately, I can't make it larger because it's exactly that part of the tools are covered somehow. Can you see this slide like this now?
Yes, we can see it.
So sorry, I can't change it because it's covered by the Zoom, so I can't change it. So I will leave it as it is. So I lead here in Hungary, middle of Europe, our EY cybersecurity and technology risk practice. So if you allow, so we are not a regulatory organ, we are not representing from this perspective anyone. So I would like to talk about our experience and certain things which are interconnected with supply chain security and resiliency. And if you allow, so we have some daily routines and daily duties towards clients. And from this perspective, I would like to talk about supply chain security. So we see that COVID-19 was not significantly slow down the supply chain question, rather the opposite. So we have seen a lot of disruptive questions, especially in the third-party risk management. So it has been told about the NIS2 regulation, which is also in Hungary a topic. And as I know, in Europe, we are among the first who already accepted the law for this on the national level already last year. And we will also make audit in this sense. What is very interesting that in our regulations we use a lot the NIST frameworks. So in this sense, the NIST 853, and we also started to on a national level a certification of products and devices which are carried out mostly according to the common criteria concept. We have, of course, also many experiences regarding different incidents. What we see, many IoT devices and solutions are used for attacks. We see it in energy and utility companies. We know exactly that is really amazing that during this sensorization of everything of the last years, the growth of the cloud, the massive decrease of the cost in the cost of the computing, and the proliferation of different supply chain softwares. So all this enables us to see new challenges, new possibilities for the attackers, and of course, also new challenges for us, how we can solve these problems. There are a couple of increasing number of unexpected disruptions as well. We see also those are stressing the supply chains over the last few years, impacting overall business performance in a dramatic way. So we see different problems like pandemic, war, earthquakes, Brexit, or the greening of consumerism. All these bring us to new solutions, where what we see, at least, that, for example, during the COVID, for example, the work from home or remotely caused a lot of problems, for example, for financial institutions, but also for companies, whereby new techniques were introduced much faster than they have been tested for security. Oh, sorry, I forgot to move my slides. So more or less, in case of different companies, we have to see what are the most disruptive questions for the companies, and what are those pressures what I was currently just talking about. The supply chains are in transition from cost-optimized manual and rigid and linear supply chains to agile network ecosystems. And we see what does it mean. So companies are changing their tools very rapidly, and we see also that they do it without any preliminary security decisions, but we see that they decide still alongside cost effectiveness and how they can be more profitable. Unfortunately, traditional supply chain structures are just not equipped with effectively cope with the increasing number of these unplanned disruptions. By design, the supply chains are lean and cost optimized. For example, they focus still on tier 1 suppliers, where many of the issues are reside on the tier 2 and tier 3 supplier levels. So what we see also that by design, we have geographical concentration and vendor concentration, and we have non-tax factors such as working from home, creating pressures on our different structures. And simply stated, resilience in most of the companies is still just not inherent in today's supply chain structures. With the pandemic or the war, so Hungary is neighboring with Ukraine, and a lot of supply chains were ending also in Ukraine. So they forced an evolution in supply chains where exposure vulnerabilities and lack of agility and responsiveness became a showstopper for many organizations. In response, what we see that slowly different company leaders are looking at their company more holistically and putting measures in place to build some resiliency for the future. In this way, we see that they try to embed end-to-end visibility. For visibility, I will have an example. And they try to include also simulation and risk monitoring. They also try to build resiliency at least through omni-capable agile networks, and they try also to secure alternative sources of supply. We also had an attack not very far ago, whereby a company, a utility company which was attacked, they were using sensors, and the sensors were used for forthcoming attack. So they were used as proxies to attack a third party abroad. And we experienced a case whereby the whole system, IoT system, had to be replaced very rapidly. We see also that companies slowly try to develop a resilient operating model and also workforce. And many of the companies try to create a trusted and secure supply chain. We see certain cases near the beside the financial institutions in energy and utility sector, and in certain technically highly productive sectors. What we see that common themes shared between resiliency and sustainability are very clear. For example, visibility is very important. For example, we have always more and more clients who are developing new solutions and techniques or platforms. Most of them are asking for so-called client-facing reports, which means that they try to show their further clients that they were letting assess their different systems or solutions, and this shows a visibility that what they are developing is really was security checked. We also see that in procurements, companies already have different layers or different possibilities to choose suppliers. And we also see that in certain cases, companies letting the testing even for 2 or 3 different companies for the same solution. So at the end, what is the path for the resiliency? So companies have to be aware what are their vulnerabilities in their supply chain. So they have to conduct an end-to-end supply chain risk assessment and determine if there are any glaring weaknesses in their visibility or critical supplier or trade and network flows. If they developed a response plan to all of these, and if they identify their critical supply chain gaps. Having identified the risk, it's important to establish which of these should be mitigated and which have to be managed. Obviously, there is a difference. And what is the cost and the benefit of mitigating and managing those different risks? So that was my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I am at your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihaly, for the perspective and the presentation. We have one last presentation before we start this panel discussion that will be held by Jacques Fouze-Brandao from TÜV IT. There he's Global Head of Advocacy at the TÜV Informationstechnik and international leading testing service provider for IT security, with activities in more than 100 countries worldwide. He has been in the identification industry for more than 20 years and advocates the TÜV IT on how to generate trust into products and services, to be able to test, evaluate, and certify products that was consistent. In this presentation, Jacques will questioning the intended use of products with digital elements as the manufacturer planned it during design, since attackers do not follow the intended use. So, Jacques, the presentation, the stage view.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just looking how to share. I think here's the one. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we heard a lot about the CRA, the NIST2. We heard about even AI was mentioned. We learned a lot about the how to mitigate those risks, or at least what is expected from certain legislation or from certain stakeholders in the market to implement into IT devices and their supply chains. I would like to raise another issue, which is coming from our daily experience as one of the leading cyber labs, and we are certifying a lot of devices, services, processes, and backend systems. And in this context, we learned about well, there is a risk assessment which is necessary, but everything is only based on intended use. And there was always a discussion about the intended use, and I would like to raise that here in this context, and would love to give you a kind of food for thought for the discussion later on, and also after the presentation today. So, what it is all about? It is about intended use. We learned about the term, or hear about the term, reasonable foreseeable misuse. What is exactly this? We, of course, learn about security and safety, but what is the difference? And of course, we hear a lot about security by design, followed by security by default. But unfortunately, security by default is also something which is not, well, at least a topic to be discussed. Starting with the intended use versus the non-intended use. Why do law, or why does law look into intended use only? Looking into the history, there's the discussion about safety of products to not get on fire, to not have this hazard around different kind of materials, for example. Safety, and when I think about elevators, for example. But then there is the discussion about cybersecurity, and coming from the cybersecurity perspective, we always think about, okay, what does the attacker do? Is he interested in intended use? Probably not. A lot of safety activities or safety features look into intended use because it is about material, and we learned about let's say production misunderstandings, or no lacks in the production when we hear the current news on airplanes, for example. This is really about safety. And we need to take this into account dramatically, and basically we have that since decades in our activities of TÜV. But on the other hand, if we look into the legislation which is currently under discussion, and it's all about under NLF, the new legislative framework, then we think about, okay, what are the laws related to the new legislative framework? And then we see there is the RED, the Radio Equipment Directive. We see the Machinery Directive. We see the Medical Device Regulation. And we also talk about the CRA already, which is not in place yet, right? And they all talk about intended use, and they talk about safety and not cybersecurity. So of course there's a match, but all this starts with a risk assessment. And if the law is asking for intended use only, of course the risk assessment is also looking only into the intended use. What does that mean for the device? So who's actually looking into the mitigation of what, if it's only the intended use? Who's actually in charge of the definition or of the what is finally in the risk assessment, and who's actually doing the risk assessment? What kind of experience do you need to do a proper risk assessment when it comes to safety, and what kind of experience do you need when it comes to the risk assessment of cybersecurity? Not to mention what is necessary to do a risk assessment when it comes to AI. So you see already we have different parties which need to work together in the future, which is not the case yet. And we know the word dual use from a military perspective, but think about dual use in the context of intended use and non-intended use. There are quite some similarities, right? And it all affects or that finally results in the trustworthiness of all these IoT devices you mentioned before already in the other presentations. If we look into the detail, just looking into a product with digital elements, as we know this framing from this wording from the CRA now, there might be the possibility to look into intended use of the functionality, looking into the data transfer, for example, or there might be the idea of looking into the intended use of a certain environment. So where is this device being used? And we learned about other aspects. I was interested in the presentation of NIST because I have never seen those new ideas NIST is looking at, because they talked about also the non-technical parts. And if you remember the discussion last year of the IoT Roundtable, we talked about the risk spectra, and there were plenty of topics in the technical domain and in the non-technical domain, which need to be taken into account to come to a proper risk assessment. And of course, there's only one way to secure the product, not only one way, but it is at least to use the unintended use into account. Getting back again to safety versus security. Look at the decades or even 140 years of work of the TÜVs in the field. This is the typical domain of the TÜVs looking into safety. It's about the intended use. It's about the life and limb of people, of materials, of use of devices or products in general. So our domain at TÜVit, of TÜV Informationstechnik, we are looking into the TÜV, we're looking into the security part. We try to measure whether the IT system or products or services are protected properly, and whether they follow certain requirements when it comes to certification, for example. So this is about human being always. There's always human being behind an attack of certain devices or products or backend systems. So, but you see already these are two different domains, and we don't want to miss that in the discussion. We had that discussion years before, but now we are back again in the discussion about the CRA and what requirements do we need in the CRA and the NIST when it comes to harmonized standards, for example. Another example or another experience is related to security by default. So you all think about security by design, what is expected from certain regulations in different regions or different countries in the world. But then there is the question probably around cybersecurity by default. So we see that many implementations of cybersecurity features lack of quality. So after think about black box pen testing approach, which maybe needs 25 days, which is maybe the approach of CSPN, Linse, BSZ in Germany. So the addressing the substantial level, the substantial assurance level of products. They fail after day 2 very often. So the expectation from the manufacturers is far beyond or far away from the expectation from the legislator in this case. And even if the security features are implemented properly, there's still the lack of proper implementation in the field. So they deactivate often security functionalities only because it's more easy, simple. The implementation is not so nice, no? And there are plenty of reasons you may hear when you talk about or when you realize that the security functionalities are not being used. So again, this does not put only the safety at risk. This also put the software, the cybersecurity at risk, and vice versa, of course. When we talk about incidents, then of course we unfortunately we also need to talk about liability, because someone is affected by that, because we are addressing here the discussion about the supply chain of IoT devices, and therefore there is the topic of liability in the discussion when it comes to incidents. So NIST 2 is already starting to address this for operators for critical infrastructures towards the complete supply chain, tier 1 to X. So that means you need to take care about what is in your device. And you mentioned this in several presentations before, software bill of material, hardware bill of material, and so on. So if this is the case, of course, we need to think back again about intended use, about risk classification, because there is probably no guidance yet available for that. On the other hand, there is the General Product Safety Directive, and someone mentioned the product liability or the product liability directive. In this case here, the General Product Safety Directive is the one who actually address all devices which are not addressed by the other legislation. But basically, it's similar. It's talking about the reasonable, foreseeable misuse. So we need to ask the question if attacking of products or networks of systems isn't reasonably foreseen nowadays. We don't know. So I would say yes, but does everybody of the ecosystem would answer with yes? And similar to the non-intended use of products. So what would be the way forward? We have we have the Cybersecurity Act in place. We have the NIST 2 in place. We are looking into the CRA upcoming soon, and other legislation, other segments related to cybersecurity. And many of those are let's say associated to the new legislative framework. And the question is maybe not to change that, but we may think about a reinterpretation of the term intended use, and we need again to think about the guidance to risk classification, because it's not in place yet, and manufacturers need that. They really need that. And one way of working would here to reflect that in the upcoming harmonized standards on the CRA. So I think that was from my side. Thank you very much, and hope I could contribute to the discussion which is coming at next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, also for this important question you raised, how to deal with this issue. So we are now at the end of the presentation. We're also a bit behind the schedule, so behind the event closing, but we still have questions from the audience, and I would like at least to raise 2 or 3 questions that we collected during the different presentations. However, the first question is actually related to the presentation from Barbara. That is, I will just read it. I've noticed that the IOXT Alliance program is listed as an example of conformity assessment program for trust label. Could you tell us by what date all the conformance standards and schemes will be listed by the FCC?
Question for Barbara, maybe?
Yes, I do not have that information.
Do you have an idea, or do you think
No, I don't have a schedule from the FCC. As I understand it, the FCC has not yet published that schedule.
Okay,
So,
fine. Thank you,
they're in
Barbara.
the yes.
There are some natural questions related to the presentation from you, Barbara, and from Gisela, since both are related to IoT consumer security. So is there any kind of mutual recognition or collaboration plan between the NIST and the ETSI? Do you know about that?
There certainly are. There certainly is very strong interest in building those collaborations and making that. I know there is work ongoing, certainly to have that mutual recognition.
Any from you to add, Gisela?
Yeah, and in the past it was already done as well. As I said, we did the ETSI consumer IoT standard, we did maintenance, and there came a lot of things into it, which came actually from NIST, for instance, for process management, vulnerability processes, and on. So there is an influence on one hand, and on the other, I noted that the EN is as well referenced with NIST, and we had both these outcome provisions, which were actually as well, I think, somehow influenced by NIST, and this is due to the fact that the consumer IoT standard had one. I think 1 point coming from the UK regulation, and the other one from German, I think, regulation, and this influenced actually very strongly than the outcome of the EN, at the EN. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There is a question regarding the presentation from Antonio. That is about the H-bomb. Would this be focused on the electronic components or also include purely mechanical components?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm there. No, yeah, I mean, in principle, it's not only about mechanical elements. And in general, in application, just that's why yes, specifically only so that's why we are extending in some sense it's part of the mechanical part, but also just in our case for this extent. That's why we say we are gathering from the different sources and put it on this with schema. In that way we can understand what is missing, what is not available in one software, and try to extend it functionality for both sides.
Okay, so you are very hard to understand, I think, due to bandwidth. Maybe you can switch off the read. Now it's better. Maybe you can give a brief summary, since I had really difficulties in understanding what you said. No, it doesn't work. Sorry.
I will try in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Then there was a question regarding the presentation from Mihaly with respect to the not technical incentives. So it says, I presume that in that case, that timely uploading of the relevant data to the repository can be made a contractual condition in the supply contract. New liability law will make that an attractive option, more so than mere self-certifying in any case. It's not directly a question, but a comment. I don't know whether you would like to tell anything regarding that, Mihaly?
Actually, I think it's rather a comment. So if it's not more concrete, then
okay, fine.
I would leave it as it is.
Okay, fine. So maybe one further question to Claudio. So what do you think? Who should identify non-compliant products that are already in the market? Who should perform the market surveying?
Well, thank you for the question. I think from my presentation, taking the chance repeating myself, I would like to say it's a joint effort, and at least from our side, what we've seen is that consumer organizations are more than ready to take up the mantle and contribute to this process, to have a clear synergy, let's say what we like to call it a vicious circle of positive compliance and positive monitoring. But at the same time, we also need to understand this should not be excusing those who have the competences and the legal attributions to do this monitoring, to in fact take their mandate to the fullest extent. So we see it as a dual approach. The question is how we go about it, of course. But but on our side, we're more than happy and to proactively jump at the gun and continue to do the work we are already doing, and happily put it out there. All we need is, let's say, more concrete mechanisms how to feed into the process. But I think we're going on the right direction on that as well. But at the end of the day, the authorities need resources, and there can be no monitoring proper resources, no matter how much competencies you give them. So we really want to also raise the alarm on that when it comes to have adequate monitoring. Actual flagging, also need to make sure that there is enough of resources out there so people can do their jobs.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe still two questions. So one to Roland from Excel. So one general question that come to my mind during your presentation. So is the work you are doing at Excel regarding certification somehow endorsed or adopted by the EU?
Thanks, Martin. So this work has been has started like some times ago, even actually when under the Cybersecurity Act, let's say, activities, and is not intended somehow to be adopted as is. It's more like support or guidelines somehow to be fed in potentially in different standardization activities, also communicated potentially to the Commission. So we sort of use it as well to drive somehow some requests in the name of excellence. So representing the industry in the EU towards how actually we position ourselves, for example, with regard to CRA. On that topic specifically, it is really one of a unique topic that we didn't see any other initiative that really tackle it. So potentially composition will be tackled in the harmonized standards, and I think that's where we will feed in. I think our work activity in liaison with, of course, the Sentinel-like potential.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think the last question go. Is there something who would like to add something?
Yeah, maybe to add that here, because there was an activity on the visualization of certain certificates associated to an IoT device before and already in EXO, and which was at the time of the CRA, but of the CSA discussion, but actually it can be used or reused again because it is I think of highest importance to companies to understand what actually is in the device, and whether the company made use of secure elements in the device and certain functionality which is already certified by a third party, which gives evidence that first of all he thought about it. Second, he's actually using something which has been developed and implemented by other parties already, and basically also implemented properly by other parties already. So it can be easily implemented in their own device, and this gives trust and trustworthiness to the proper implementation later on. So even if it's not the guarantee, but at least it supports the approach of the manufacturer as well as their customers.
Okay, thanks. Important addition. Yeah, what to you is, since you do not ask to revise existing regulation, even though you are questioning the intended use with respect to cybersecurity. So, what do you think with respect to the interpretation? So, who should interpret this term? Is it the certification authority? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the operator?
Mhm. I think we all need to think about it, what intended use means, and discuss that jointly, because we all need to understand it jointly. Finally, in the end, in the same manner. If we don't understand it in the same manner, it does not make sense at all to have it used in a law or in a standard. So I think as it is in place, we need to define it again and rethink it from a cybersecurity perspective, because that hasn't been done yet. But there will be discussion. So we don't want to wait until there need to be a judge to decide whether this was intended use or not, right? So it would be better to discuss it beforehand and come to a point where everybody decides or understands, okay, this makes sense, and then we go that way. This makes life easier for all parties, I guess.
Okay. So thanks a lot. I think we are then at the end of our event. I would like to thank all of the presenters for joining the discussion, for bringing this great presentation here to this event. And I hope that also the participants enjoyed it very much. And in case of further questions, also please use the website, follow the DOS project, and you can also get further information there regarding the topic of supply chain security. Many thanks. Have a nice day.